and leadership on a regular basis in that setting. My background's in church music, where I've served in churches large and small going back to college days. And this is a fairly, relatively small church. We run a couple hundred people or so, but it works out well for me with my day job being my writing and editing, and keeping my hands involved in real life church situations. So that's what I do. So thank you all for being a part of this. This is a dangerous.
Oh, well, does anybody know where I'm supposed to be?
Are you doing the reading session on the cantata or something?
Yeah.
Yeah, in the recital hall.
Oh, it's in the recital hall. Okay.
Yeah. Don't come in here. We don't want him. It's easier to tell stories about him when he's not here, you know. So.
Well, they just switch places. You want to go in there?
I know. That's where I stopped, and he comes here. So. That's the back row. I just counted out enough here for so. This will just give you a little bit of something to kind of track with me, and if there's something that you say, hey, I'd like to, remember that or something like that either I say or somebody else in the room says. Some of you have been in some of my previous sessions here, but I'd love for this to be an interactive kind of gathering here. Here, and I'll give you, in case others come in here, there's some extras just. Put them in their hands. One of the things I have done in these sessions, which I find a little bit helpful, it just kind of helps us to have a sense of who you are. Al Travis, I just saw you in Georgia. I just put this together now. I just saw your name.
I'm not working this weekend.
You're not working. You're here as
hanging out here. I live in Fort Worth.
Glad you're here.
Thank you. Well, it's good to be here.
Things went well in Georgia after. Al came into Georgia about the time I was leaving. I just stepped in and introduced myself and connected with him. I've been familiar with his name and his work over the years, but glad you're here. One of the things that I have found helpful is just to talk a little about who we are, what you do, where you are from, what you do in the life of the local church setting. So if you take, we're not asking for life histories here, just briefly, just kind of summarize who you are and what you do. Lisa, may I start with you?
Mm-hmm. Lisa Robinson, from Waco, not originally, I'm from Georgia originally, but I play at the church here and teach piano.
Lisa. Janet?
I'm assistant organist at a church of about 4,500, Lutheran Church in Shoreview, Minnesota, and
You're at Incarnation Lutheran.
I'm at
Okay.
Incarnation, yeah, on Hodgson Road.
One of those small Lutheran churches in our neighborhood, yeah.
That's right, yeah.
Got it.
And my responsibilities are to be at the church for 2 services every Sunday. I accompany the adult choir either on organ or piano, primarily piano, and I fill in when the director of worship and music, Dave Ellison, who was here before, is not there. For example, this coming Sunday, and do the entire services.
Sure. Okay, great.
I'm Joshua. I'm a student here at Baylor. I grew up in Austin, but I have a church kind of, halfway between here and Austin, sort of, Rosebud, Texas. Anyone's heard of that? Mm-hmm. It's southeast of here, and I'm the pianist there.
Good. Josh or Joshua?
Joshua.
Joshua. Okay, Joshua. And what year are you?
I'm going to be a junior.
Going to be a junior. And your degree, your major?
Church music.
Church music.
Piano
Okay.
emphasis, yeah.
Piano emphasis, good.
My name is Holly Moore. I am the pianist at First Baptist in Bryan. I'm also the accompanist for the A&M Scene Cadets. So I just play piano.
Good. I'm glad you're here. Lisa.
My name is Lisa Clement. I'm actually Director of Vocal Studies at the University of Maryland in Baylor, just 45 minutes south of here. But I'm also pianist at First Methodist in Belton.
Belton, because I don't know my Texas geography real well. Where
I-35, if you're going to Austin, Belton's right there.
Okay, got it.
45 minutes.
Got it. Glad you're here.
Laura Pepper, currently in Knoxville, Tennessee. Christian graduate, my degree is in organ and piano, and have served as a church pianist, currently children's choir coordinator, and I teach piano lessons.
Good. Are you native to Knoxville?
Not originally.
Have you run into a gal named Mary McDonald?
Yes.
Crazy Mary. She's
Yes.
hard to miss, you
I
know.
went to school with her son.
Oh, did you? Okay. Yeah, he is serving a church in Florida, I think. Isn't that right? Yeah. Mary McDonald, maybe will be familiar with that name and her music, so, yeah.
I'm Al Travis from Fort Worth. I'm an organist and director of music ministries at Broadway Baptist. I've been organist there for a long time and retired from teaching at Southwestern Seminary. I'm interested in ministering, mentoring, and all of what Lloyd, I want to hear what you have to say today. So it's great to be here.
Glad you are here. Thank you.
I'm Billy Adams. I play the organ at Colonial Hill Baptist Church in Snyder, Texas.
Really glad you're here.
I'm Triesta Lilly from Snyder, and I'm an elementary music teacher and the pianist at church. We're compadres
Oh, is that right? Okay, that's the way that
from
works.
church.
And Triesta, you told us this morning in one of the earlier sessions that your church is right across the street from the school where you teach. So it.
Which is a large school. We have like 1,400 students.
Yeah, 1,400 in an elementary school, K through 5. I knew they did things big in Texas, but
It's a big one.
We're going to focus on who we are as keyboard players in the church. And I have, as you know from the title of the session, just selected these three themes. We could spend a lot of time on each of them, but we're going to do this kind of in a summary fashion, and I hope that you will feel free to jump in with thoughts that you have as we walk through this. But for me, this role that we fulfill as keyboard players in the church, organists, pianists, and that may include Sunday morning worship, that may include accompanying of choir, it may include accompanying various ensembles in the life and ministries of the church of which we are part. It starts with, the ministry starts with the heart. In one of the sessions yesterday, I read the passage from Philippians chapter 2, 1 through 11. Some of you were in that session. And I won't go through and read that passage one more time, but one of the things that we see Paul addressing to the church at Philippi, chapter 2, verses 1 through 11, are basically three themes that I think are apropos for those of us who function in ministry in the life of the church, particularly music ministry. He talks about selfish ambition, vain conceit, and concentration on self. Those are 3 points that he underscores in that passage, all saying that they are inappropriate or out of line in terms of the plan of God for the early Christian. And I think they're appropriate kinds of considerations for those of us who live the life as church musicians. The Apostle Paul is encouraging or motivating people to serve in a manner which will benefit the larger community of faith. And he is saying in that passage that it's important for us to get our eyes on the ultimate goal, to get our eyes off of ourselves. Many of us in the work of being musicians and having worked with musicians in the church over the years, as I sometimes have said, I may have even said this yesterday, I have worked with some very, very gifted musicians for whom the platform will never be large enough. Folks who simply needed a little more of the platform, a little more of the limelight, a little more of that, and forgetting that we are called first and foremost to be servants. One of the illustrations that I hearken back to frequently is what Jesus did on the night before his crucifixion when he washed the feet of his disciples and essentially challenged them to go and do likewise. The message was to go and to be servants to the people you're called to serve, to be servants to the people in places where God will direct you. And I think it's an important challenge, an important understanding for those of us who serve in music ministry, particularly in our roles as keyboard players. Sometimes we are called upon to be the center of the focus in terms of perhaps if we're asked to do a solo in a concert kind of venue. But 99% of the time, I think we function in roles which are to be supportive of other aspects of the worship ministry. And that's where I think this whole sense of understanding what Paul is saying here in Philippians 2 and what Jesus was saying to his disciples, to serve, to take the focus off ourselves, but to be there to enhance and to serve and to support is key to all that we do. I find it rather ironic that on this night when Jesus was kneeling before his disciples in an act of servanthood, something that was not done by leaders and teachers and mentors, but done by the servants as an act of hospitality when people came into their home, on that very same night, we have disciples probably just down the table a bit quibbling about who was going to be the greatest in the kingdom of God. You remember that little study in contrast, which I find to be rather ironic, yet in some ways probably not all that different at times from where we sometimes have struggled as Christians or as church musicians or as leaders in the church. But Jesus reminds us again about the importance of understanding our role and nurturing the heart of service, which will then enhance our ministry and enable us to be the very best we can be for the kingdom's sake. One of the things I oftentimes say in workshop settings like this or in reading sessions, it is vital that we understand the importance of partnership. We all have a role to play. Again, going back to Paul, we see in 1 Corinthians 12 where he talked about the body of Christ and how important it was. Each aspect, each piece, each part of the body carrying a significant role in being servants and making the body complete and truly functional in the way it fulfilled Christ's calling. And I think that application is true for those of us. In my role, for example, it involved in working with the publication of resources for churches like yours and like mine. There is no hierarchy here. There aren't folks who function at a greater level of responsibility or trust or anything like that. The people who publish, the people who write, the people who arrange, the people who direct, the people who accompany, the singers in your choir and my choir, those that sing well and those who have limited skill and limited training, all of us carry an equal and important part in what we do. And I think that's a perspective that I like to see nurtured in my church ministry. I continue to underscore that when I meet with my musicians in my local church ministry, with the choir members with whom I work and serve. All of us have a responsibility, and all of us carry significant responsibility in the fulfillment of the ministry of music as we've been called to share and to serve in our local churches. It's critical, I think, that we nurture that servant heart, making a personal commitment to servanthood. I don't think it's an option. I think Christ made that very clear to us. One of the things that's been important for me is to identify some role models, some mentors in my life. And I think that probably all of us can hearken back in our own personal life's journey, our own journey of faith, and say there have been some people who were significant individuals who influenced and saw something in me sometimes when I didn't see it in myself, encouraged me, nurtured my faith, nurtured me to become the very best that I could be with the skills that I have. I look back at some of my church music directors in my local church, some of my college professors, some of my graduate school professors who encouraged me and saw something that oftentimes I didn't see in myself. And I think for us to identify those mentors, but even at the next level, to become those mentors for people in our church will help to foster this whole sense of servanthood within the life and ministry of the churches that we serve. I think there is this sense of developing a relationship which enables us to be accountable for who we are as Christian people and as church musicians, establishing a trust relationship with others in our ministry circles. In our church, or sometimes in a local church situation, it's helpful to do that outside of your immediate church. Years ago, I served full-time in a pretty good-sized church in Columbus, Ohio. And I developed a very close friendship with the music director, the minister of music, at a Nazarene church not far from where my particular church was. And he and I would get together pretty regularly for lunch. because it was in those settings you could grouse about the people in your church from time to time, or the personalities, or some of the challenges, or even on occasion even some of the staff folks, that you're some of the tough issues. And we kind of held each other accountable. He could do the same to me, and it was a confidential kind of relationship, but something that I valued, and something that isn't always easily replicated in other places where you go. But his name is John. John and I established that kind of friendship, that kind of association. And I would encourage you, sometimes it's not so easy to develop that or establish that with people on your own staff or in your own church context. Maybe it's not even healthy at times, depending on the direction this is all going to go. But as you can be candid and honest and find that kind of a trust relationship with another person, I do think it helps us to become the very best that we can be as ministers in nurturing that heart of servanthood we've talked about, and fostering a healthy attitude in terms of the way we work in the places where we serve. Does that make sense? Any thoughts on that as you think back about relationships you have established and had with others over the years, people who encouraged you or people that you have been able to develop a trust relationship with? Let's talk about the musical piece of this. The being minister is vital to what we do, understanding who we are, but the roles to which we have each been called is that in some role and some work in music. And I think we are challenged to be the very best we can be. As I said in a session earlier today, excellence is a relative term. What might be defined as an excellent choir in a church of 50 or 60 people might be defined differently in a church of 3,000 or 4,000 in terms of the sheer musical excellence. But the challenge is there, I think. The challenge is consistent and steady in all the places where we're called and given opportunity to serve and to minister, to be the very best that we can be. I have years when my church musicians and the core nucleus leadership in my various churches has perhaps been stronger than it has been in other years. But the challenge is still there, to encourage those people to be the very best they can be. But that challenge also extends to me as a church musician, to be the very best that I can be. I think one of the ways that we strive and accomplish being the best we can be is to understand how important worship is, and nurturing a healthy theology and a healthy understanding of what worship is. For me, the centrality of worship, the priority of worship, is the number one agenda of the church. The late Dr. Robert Weber, some of you will know that name, theologian and author, provided an awful lot of perspective and sound thinking and helpful thinking for those of us involved in the life of the church. And he used to use the imagery of an old wagon wheel. And he would say, worship is really at the hub of the life of the church. Yes, educational ministries are important. Yes, ministry to children, to youth, missions, evangelism. All of that is important, and it's vital to what we do. But it is not the hub. Worship is the first and number one priority of the life of the church. And I think you can substantiate that perspective from Scripture. If you look in the Old Testament, it doesn't take long for you to see how much detail is provided, for example, in God's instructions about the construction of the tabernacle. The amount of detail is, frankly, staggering. There's a theologian, Ralph P. Martin, and he observes this. He says, worship and the manner in which worship was offered were evidently extremely important to God. You see the importance of worship from the Moses' Mount Sinai experience when he received the 10 Commandments. Because you remember what the number one commandment was? You shall have no other gods before me. Essentially saying the worship of God was the number one priority. Jesus was approached by the so-called experts of the law, and when they asked him what the greatest commandment was, and he said, first and foremost, to love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, all your mind. The religious leaders of Jesus' day had kind of gotten away from that understanding of what true worship was about. and it had become kind of a regimented listing of details and obligations and specific agendas to fulfill, and then when you had done that, you had done your part. But Jesus took it a whole lot further than that, and he really offered the perspective that all of life, all that we are, is really an act of worship. And Paul underscores that in Romans 12 when he talks about making our lives, offering our bodies as living sacrifices. I think in essence he was saying that our responsibility is to live lives which are truly acceptable to God as living acts of worship. I think that was the message that we get from the way Jesus was presenting a whole different perspective on what worship was to the religious leaders of his day. And I think to foster that kind of perspective with our worship leaders and in our own lives is critical to helping us to understand how we become the very best music ministers that we can be in our understanding in our local churches. One of the convictions that I hold about worship, and one of the convictions I hold as a church music minister, is that the understanding that worship should cost us something. I think this is particularly important for us to understand and to underscore and to really celebrate as church musicians. It gives credibility to our commitment to rehearsal, to preparation, to practice. I'm like anybody. I like the discounts that come in the mail or in the newspaper to say you buy one meal, you get one free. I like, you have Kohl's in this area. I guess you probably do. And every now and then you get the coupons in the mail that says you get the 15% discount or the 20% to 25%. When you get the 40% discount or whatever it is, whatever the top one is, that's always a good day. And it seems insane to go and use it for some reason. The irony is that we all like discounts. We look for discounts, but it's a mistake, I think, for us to go and to look for those little places where you can cut the corner when it comes to worship. In the Old Testament, it became obvious pretty quickly that the worship of God was to cost us something, was to cost the people of God something. A tangible offering that they drug into the places of worship to offer sacrifices. You can't believe that those animals went willingly. They had to go with resistance and being a real struggle for those who were presenting them on the altars of sacrifice. But these offerings were to be the very best that people had to give. We see that in Exodus. The offerings were not to be leftovers, for the scripture says, bring the best of the first fruits of your soil to the house of God. Or when you bring, this is from Leviticus, if you bring from the herd or flock a fellowship offering, it must be without defect or blemish to be acceptable. The challenge was to come bringing the very best you had. And it was going to take some effort. It was going to take some preparation to go and to select the very best, to harvest the crop, to select the very best animal, to take it to make your offering to God as an act of your worship. One of my very favorite passages of Scripture is found in 2 Samuel chapter 24. In that passage of Scripture, we see King David, and he comes onto the property of a man named Araunah. Araunah was a Jebusite, lived in the Jerusalem area in the reign and time of King David. King David and the people of Israel had been dealing with a number of difficult situations, some plagues that they were dealing with, and King David's resident prophet at that time, Gad, had a vision from God. And God had said, if you will build an altar and make a sacrificial offering, then Israel will have alleviated for this time some of the plagues and some of the difficulties and challenges you're dealing with. So King David receives this vision through Gad. He arrives on the property of Araunah, and Araunah responds to him like you or I would if a political dignitary showed up at your house or my house unannounced. And he's humble. He says, I'm humbled, I'm honored, King David, that you've come to my place. In conversation, he finds out that King David is going to build an altar, a sacrificial offering to God. And he says, take the yoke, take my livestock, build your offering, I give it to you, here it is. And King David responds with what I think is a profound response of understanding about what sacrifice and commitment and worship that costs us something was all about. He says, no, I will not take it from you. I will buy it from you. Because you see, I cannot offer to the Lord my God burnt offerings which cost me nothing. I cannot offer to the Lord my God offerings which cost me nothing. I like that a lot because I think it underscores the understanding that worship is intended to be something that we give and we prepare for and that we come offering our very best. Sometimes I feel that we as church musicians and the people in our ministries have sometimes been guilty of giving the leftovers to God. And we're called to give the very best we have to God. I shared a story in one of the sessions, and forgive me if a couple of you heard this yesterday, but I think it's pertinent here that we talk about this example of offering to God something which costs us something. I've heard Joe Martin tell this story about a group from America, a choral group, a church choral group that was going to China to do a tour. And they raised money, they prepared for weeks and months, raising money and getting all the details and all this in place to go to China to do this tour. And they had sung in several churches over a period of several days. They were coming to the end of the tour and what was really to be the grand climax of this international experience and this international trip. They'd been moved by the generosity of the Chinese people that they had visited and inspired and all of that. And they were coming to what was to be the climax. And it was a Sunday morning. They had driven the bus, loaded the bus, driven the bus some distance to get there in time to prepare and to sing as a part of this congregation's worship service in kind of a concert setting, but as well as some worship. The bus drives onto the church parking lot. They get ready to get out, and they hear robust singing in the sanctuary. The last hymn of the worship service. And this choir is singing it with strength and energy. And the choral director and the choir members are just devastated because they realize that somehow they got their wires crossed and they've arrived as the worship service is concluding. And the choral director gets off, he goes and catches one of the staff persons and says, I am just mortified that we have arrived here at the end of your worship service, and I don't know what happened, but somehow we got our wires crossed, and I just feel awful about it. And the staff person reaches out, touches the shoulder of the director, he says, no, don't you worry, you are right on time. We've expected you just now. We look forward to your participation in our worship today. The director says, it's confusing. He says, well, I don't get it, because the people are singing the last number, the last hymn of the service, and yet you say we're here on time. He said, oh, no. In this church in China, the people arrive 1 hour early every week to practice the hymns so that they can present an offering in their singing, which is worthy of the God we worship. It's a powerful message, you know. In our culture, in our day, it would be very difficult in our American churches probably to encourage and to foster that kind of a perspective and action in the life of our churches. But the message is not dissimilar to what I think is important for us to continue to nurture and to encourage with our musicians, with our choir members, within our own hearts as keyboard participants. That the God we serve, the God we worship, is worthy of only our very best efforts. He is worthy of the time spent in preparation and rehearsal, and we need to find ways to nurture that, and to develop that, and to strengthen that. Those are some of my thoughts on the ministry aspect of this, I should say the musician aspect of this as we think about our commitment to excellence. How have you found this to work in your own church? How do you encourage people in your church, in your roles, whatever that might be, as an accompanist, as a choral director, and I know many of you wear multiple hats, that simply goes with the territory in our churches. But how do you nurture this perspective of being the very best, of being well prepared, of your choirs doing the very best, of your accompanists doing the very best, of your vocalists doing the very best? How do you nurture that perspective? What have you found to work in your church settings? Or perhaps on the flip side, maybe some of this is a struggle. Do you find yourself struggling with that from time to time? Anybody game to share any observations, perspectives, or experiences in that regard?
Well, in Minnesota, summertime is lake time, and we don't have a choir as such during the summer, but we do call on participants from the congregation and the choir to prepare a solo or something like that. And just working with one person like that seems to radiate a lot of energy to other people in the congregation and to other people in the choir, and I think it works for us.
Yeah. Some of it has to do with gaining a sense of what if I can use this word, the culture of the church. There are some expectations one can place in certain situations which might work in one setting and might not. Janet, living in Minnesota, I kind of get that, because it seems like, and I don't think that's unique to Minnesota. I think there are influences in various parts of the country which make certain times of the year more of a challenge for others. Last year I was doing a music workshop in Minnesota. It's the middle of the summer, and we're in the metro area like you are, the Minneapolis-St. Paul metro area, and I just asked the people, I said, is there anybody in this room whose choir is still going? And one director in the back said, oh yeah, my choir is going and it's strong. And I said, really? I said, where are you? And he serves, and you'll know this and the others may not, but he serves a church in the Cross Lake area, which is resort community. So people, educators or people who have, a place they go for the summer, they're there, and he says our choir is strongest in these months. We have a retired pastor in our church who served a church for many years in a resort lakes kind of area, and he said the very same thing. I served a church, I had a colleague in a church that served in it was a smaller community. Not a small, tiny community. By Snyder standards, it would probably feel large, but it was a community of 50,000 or so. But he said, you folks we would meet periodically in a retreat right after Easter. And most of us would go, having just experienced glorious Easter worship services, the choir loft was full, we pulled out all the stops and that kind of thing. But he was in a college community, a Christian college community. And he said, you folks come in having experienced, these wonderful worship services and breaking record attendances and that kind of thing. But he says in our church, Easter Sunday is a low Sunday in terms of attendance. So it's just one of the distinctives of the community in which he served as compared to what the rest of us served. So a lot of it has to do with kind of determining and assessing and finding out what works, as you have done, Janet, in your own situation. So others of you, yeah.
Just going back to the difficulty to keep a commitment to excellence as a student, it at least feels like it's a real draw of your resources to prepare something, or how much time do you spend on a piece for Sunday when grades and what else,
juries and recitals and all of that.
And
yeah,
there's other things to do. So that's been a challenge.
Yeah, and the reality is, it's Joshua, right? Joshua, the reality is those challenges will never change. Yeah. It's just that they won't include profs and grades and papers and tests as such as you know them now. The reality is those challenges will take different forms, as they do for many of our people when they're dealing with the kids' soccer schedules and the basketball schedules and the other kinds of things. And so I get it. I've been there both as a father and as a music director, and finding that balance and all that is one of the ongoing challenges for all of us. But I think somehow we continue to hold the bar high and say, I'm one of these persons that I'm a list maker. So my to-do list is a daily process for me. And the reality is, I probably can count on one hand the number of times in my entire life when I've gotten everything checked off on my list. And that may be optimistic. So the reality is, I think we continue to find ways to hold the bar high, recognizing that it will be a challenge for us, and we may never quite achieve the goal, or our people may never quite achieve the goal. But I think the responsibility and the challenge is to continue to hold the goal and to hold the standard of expectation as high as we reasonably can. Not to the point where people become discouraged, but where they are motivated to try to strive to be the very best they can be. And also, I think it's the prudent director of music who understands there are some times in the lives of some of our people when they simply cannot fulfill the commitment to the level that maybe we thought they could or would, or perhaps for whatever reason, situations in life, situations at home have simply made it impossible for them to. I have frequently had, red letter rehearsals for my choir members or for my musicians saying, this is a vital, essential rehearsal. You must be there unless you are dead or in jail. One of those kinds of things. But then you have the mother who comes to you and say, this is my son's final choir concert at school, or this is, this or that. And you simply say, that is vital. That's important for you to be there. And that's a part of who we are and what we have to recognize, I think, because there cannot be a one-size-fits-all answer to every particular scenario and situation. Any other thoughts that you have on how do we encourage and foster this commitment to excellence? Or some of the answers that you have found in your own situation, or maybe some of the frustrations you have?
Well, I would say that early service on Sunday morning requires a little extra caffeine. So I've learned to, because, boom, 8:30 and you're on, and you're trying to get people, maybe people understand. So that's a personal thing, but our choir director continually reminds the choir that they're leading worship is what they're doing. And she thanks them, and when we pray right before we go into the service, it's thank you for these people who are worshiping you and taking their time. It's that I think they're there because of their love of God and they're wanting to minister and sing, but they're very loyal to her.
Yeah. And I think we do establish that. I think there is an established loyalty that develops to leadership. I've always said that leadership in the life of the church, and I think especially in music ministry, is key. I think it's important for the wise leader to continue to develop and to nurture the perspective that this isn't about me as a leader. It's ultimately about the God that we serve together. But to establish a rapport and a relationship that we can celebrate and use as a bit of encouragement for people to give their very best. That's important. And I commend some of you who've been in places of service. Al, you've been there how many years? 30-some, you said.
35.
Yeah. That says something about even not knowing your church and your situation. It says something significant about you and the people that have partnered with you in ministry. That's a great thing. That's a wonderful thing to be able to celebrate, and I think it does help people to move to the next level in terms of their willingness to give their very best, because they have seen you in those kinds of roles, giving your very best over a period of seasons, of good seasons and not so good seasons, and we've all had those.
Well, one of the things that's helped me personally in the last, I'd say, 10 years is taking more seriously the phrase, I am a temple musician. And some of us have taught that for years, but for me personally, I think it's just really gotten a hold of my heart in about the last 10 years that my true identity, whether I am at a big church, a little church, big pipe organ, an old Hammond, clunker or a Steinway, if I've been given some musical gifts and there's an opportunity to use them, then actually I'm in the lineage of the full-time temple musicians. Most of us are part-time, but our identity and job description should be no less, but it just helps me to think I'm a temple musician, so then how serious should I take my job?
Yeah.
I'm thinking pretty serious.
Yeah. And, we follow in the Levi tribe, the tribe of Levi, the holy tribe in terms of their role of worship leadership in the Old Testament. We are a part of that long line I love the phrase, Al, of being temple musicians, of being musicians called to use our gifts. And it doesn't matter what size our church is, or what resources we have, or what the summer resort attraction has done to decimate either our congregational numbers or our music resource numbers or whatever. The God we serve is unchanging, and we still are called to give our very best. But it's not always easy, is it?
But don't you think the people we work with expect that? And the more we try to give, the more they expect. And, you know, even if you're getting tired, what we get back from them in terms of help and expectations is unbelievable. Don't you find that?
I cannot tell you how many times, we'll come back to you, Julie. Lisa, yeah.
That's okay.
Come back to you. One of the things that I can recall in many of my rehearsals with choir, which happens middle of the week, I suppose, like it does for many of you, choir members who've come to me afterward and said, boy, this has been an exhausting day, or it's been a really tough week, or we're dealing with some tough stuff at home or at work or whatever. I really didn't want to come tonight, but because of my commitment to the choir ministry and even to you, I just felt like I needed to come. And this has been an inspiring and rejuvenating hour and a half, whatever it is, you know, for me. And I'm walking out of here feeling so grateful that I made the decision to come and to be a part of that. And again, that's just a part of helping people to see the healthy perspective, the commitment that we make to each other and to our ministry. And I think we celebrate that when that happens. I think we do, at least.
Thinking about excellence and ways to inspire excellence. For me, and I know a lot of people, you know, in our church, loving the people. You know, you talked about developing rapport between the choir minister of music, whatever you want to call it, or her, and the choir. That relationship is vitally important. If the choir knows that you love them, and importantly too, believe in them, believe in what they can do, and give them music that challenges them to, you know, to raise to a higher level. You know, all that. Those two things are really important, I think, for me, to reach that next plane of excellence.
And it takes a wise and discerning music leader to figure out how far ahead can we be in front to challenge and encourage people without moving so far ahead that you leave them discontented or discouraged and saying, oh, there's no way, I'm just walking. And that's where we have to trust the Spirit of God, I think, to help us have discerning spirits so we know what's right. And I think that's a helpful transition into this last section I'd like for us to look at a little bit, being a mentor. we touched on this morning, for those of you who were there when we were talking about nurturing keyboard players in the life of our church. I think it's a vital kind of thing for us. I alluded to this a minute ago when I talked about when we reflect back on our own personal journeys. I think all of us could identify some people who saw something in us, encouraged us, celebrated what we had to give, a gift, a talent, and really prodded us on to do more with that. I'd like for you just for a moment to think back and maybe identify a person in your own mind that did that for you, that helped you as a mentor, as somebody who simply encouraged you, challenged you, saw something in you. Okay, do you have a name in your mind that you can just think of, just even as you're recalling? Anybody willing to share just briefly about that influence, that person, how that individual might have impacted you, particularly as it relates to your role in the life of the church in music?
I would. My mentor would be my piano teacher, but more importantly than that, she was our church pianist, and I always say that she taught me to play, but more than that, she taught me to love the piano and to love to make music. And I have a vivid memory of her saying, "You're going to play in church one day," and I thought, "You've got to be kidding me." But that was the first time I thought, yeah, maybe I can do that. And she just, walked me through and just made it natural and made it something I just was supposed to do.
Good. Thanks, Holly, for sharing that. Anybody else?
For me, it was my children's choir director. She kept encouraging me, and I got a number of lead roles in the church performances, and stayed there a number of years. So yeah, it was very encouraging.
And I think the impact of music directors, choir directors on children and youth. I don't think we can overstate the significance of that. We said, a couple of you were in the session this morning, we said, there is no more affirming, encouraging environment than the church, in my opinion. You hear these horror stories about people who went to a Juilliard or an Eastman or some kind of prestigious conservatory, and they had people in the audiences while somebody was doing their senior recital, hoping these people would stumble in the performance because they saw them really as the major competition, perhaps, for the plum job that was awaiting one or the other. That doesn't exist in a healthy church setting. People saying, even if we as a child or as a teenager, maybe doing an offertory or singing or something in a musical, Joshua, like you were, somewhere, a presentation of some sort, stumble over something, the affirmations we received in the life of the church oftentimes encouraged us to take some risks. I've directed youth choirs for decades, up until just the last few years, where I finally stepped aside for the first time. And we would oftentimes do some dramatic kinds of things as a part of our youth choir presentations and what have you. And I had kids that were willing to, to do a solo or to do a little dramatic kind of thing in the church setting that would not consider doing it at school. Or they tried it and had success in the church setting and then decided, okay, well, now I'm willing to take the risk in the less nurturing environment of the school setting at times. And that's why I just think that if we understand that the church is this affirming community of faith that can allow some of our children and some of our youth and some of our adults to take some risks that they feel like they cannot or will not take in other places, we got to celebrate that for all that it's worth and find ways to build upon that to strengthen our respective ministries. We're near the end of this. On how many of you were here Monday night when we did the reading session in the Truett Auditorium? A couple of you were anyhow. I just alluded to a story that I'm going to actually read to you, so it will be a little repetition if you just heard me reference this, but I kind of summarized it the other night. But it's a story by Bob Benson. Bob Benson is the late Bob Benson, an author, a theologian coming out of the Nazarene tradition and background. If you're familiar with the publishing world, you know that there's been a Benson publishing company, and now there's a Brentwood Benson. This is all kind of, in many ways, connected with the Benson family, who lived in Nashville for many years. But Bob Benson was known as not only a great author and theologian, but a wonderful storyteller. And he used to tell a story that he would call a bologna sandwich, and it goes like this. He says, "Do you remember when they had old-fashioned Sunday school picnics? I do. As I recall, it was back in the olden days, as my kids would say, back before they had air conditioning. The church said, we'll all meet at Sycamore Lodge in Shelby Park at 4:30 on Saturday. You bring your supper, we'll furnish the iced tea. But if you were like me, you came home at the last minute, and when you got ready to pack your picnic, all you could find in the refrigerator was one dried up piece of bologna and just enough mustard in the bottom of the jar so you got it all over your knuckles trying to get to it." Now, this is back in the days before the squeezed mustard, so. And also just 2 slices of stale bread to go with it. So you made your bologna sandwich, you wrapped it in an old brown bag, and you went to the picnic. When it came time to eat, you sat at the far end of the table and you spread out your sandwich. But the folks who sat next to you, well, they had brought a feast. Somebody in that home was a good cook, and they'd worked hard all day to get ready for the picnic. And they had fried chicken, baked beans, potato salad, homemade rolls, sliced tomatoes, pickles, olives, celery, and 2 big homemade chocolate pies just to top it off. That's what they spread out there next to you while you sat there with your bologna sandwich. But they said to you, why don't we just put it all together? Oh, no, I couldn't do that. I couldn't even think of it, you murmured in embarrassment with one eye on the chicken. Oh, come on. There's plenty of chicken, plenty of pie, plenty of everything, and we just love bologna sandwiches. Let's just put it all together. And so you did. And there you sat, eating like a king, and you came like a pauper. One day it dawned on me that God had been saying just that sort of thing to me. Why don't you take what you have, what you are? I will take what I have, what I am, and we'll just share it all together. I began to see that when I put what I had, what I was, what I am, what I hope to be with what God was, I had stumbled upon the bargain of a lifetime. God calls us to be ministers, servant ministers, to be the very best we can with the tools with which we have been equipped as musicians. But I think God also calls us to pass that on in a mentoring role to those who will follow us. And I confess there are days when I feel like all I have to bring to the table is a bologna sandwich. But that's the miracle of a relationship with God, and a God who promises to be our strength in our times of need, our help in our weakness. God takes what we bring and makes something special out of it. Mother Teresa used to say, God didn't call me to be successful, God called me to be faithful. I think that's what we're called to be. Thank you, friends, for being a part of this. I apologize again for starting a little bit late, but I thank you for your commitment to what we collectively do in music ministry, and I wish you God's very best in all that you do as you move forward. Thank you for the time.
Thank you. Same to you.